Hello, friends and family from the wider SAPIR community, really from around the world, and welcome to our second installment of our three-part 1 year later series, where we are asking individuals of note from last year, some of our SAPIR contributors, to revisit some of the arguments made and some of the positions that they held in the weeks after the October 7th attacks. Now, we launched this series on October 8th with Dr. Michal Biton, where we discussed the demands of Jewish peoplehood in a post-10/7 world. To be clear, we selected that topic and that date by design, because if ever there was a time to investigate and reaffirm the notion of a Jewish collectivity, or as Michal put it, a shared Jewish we, it was the day after the anniversary of the worst attack on Jewish lives in our lifetimes, or at least for many of us. And if ever there was a date to have that conversation, it was October 8th. Why? Because that was the day that signifies for many the shattering of a myth about our station in the United States and other parts of the world. Bret Stephens, known as the editor-in-chief of SAPIR, coined the term the October 8th Jew as, quote, those who woke up a day after our greatest tragedy since the Holocaust to see how little empathy there was for us in many of the spaces and communities and institutions we thought we comfortably inhabited. Cards on the table, I resided in that space, as did many others, if not a majority of Jews here in the US. And at that time, we were all quite disturbed by the profound lack of empathy for the victims of the October 7th attack on the left flank of the progressive wing of our political spectrum. That's why last year we invited two guests who worked and lived and navigated and toiled in the progressive corridors of power to help us make sense of that moment. One was Joel Rubin, a longtime leader in progressive foreign policy circles. And the other is our guest today, my good friend Sheila Katz, who serves as the CEO of the National Council of Jewish Women, known as NCJW. I think now a 131-year-old Jewish feminist civil rights organization. I think we said 130 last year, with over, I think still 210,000 advocates working for the full equity and safety of women, children, and family in the United States and Israel. Now, Sheila has many accolades, but if I went through all of them, we'd have no time to be in conversation. So like last time, we are going to, like last week, I should say, we're going to have a truncated discussion for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions from you in the SAPIR community. And so if at any point you have a question that you would like to ask Sheila, an argument you would like to make, don't wait till the tail end. Insert that question or statement that you would like Sheila to react to in the chat function at the bottom. And as we always say, if you want to remain anonymous, please note that. So anyway, with that, Sheila, welcome back. Good to see you.
It's so good to see you, Chanan. It's good to be back.
So Sheila, I gotta say, of all the conversations we hosted last fall, we tried to have like a weekly series of these discussions. Our discussion on the, quote, future of American progressive coalitions with Joel was it really struck a chord for many people, in part because, you know, there are a lot of essays and op-eds at the time looking at the manifestation of this issue, but this was the first time there was a public conversation that took place. And I got to tell you, I was looking through some of the emails I had received afterwards, and a former colleague wrote to me after our discussion that it was really the first time, he said, quote, that I felt intellectual and emotional relief in that month. Remember, this was what, I think like November 1 or 2 last year. So just to get things going, I'm curious if you had any reactions, any critiques that stood out for you in the immediate aftermath of our discussion, and what, if anything, did that signify?
Yeah, I also got a tremendous, and I do a lot of speaking, I do a lot of public events, I'm at a lot of rallies, at a lot of protests. Like any given week, I'm out and about, and after October 7th, especially so, because like most of us, I just felt this need to be standing up for the hostages, for the people who were silenced. I actually think I received the most feedback of anything from doing this with you a year ago, because you're right, we had all been feeling gaslit by the feminist community, by the civil rights community, by the progressive community, by a lot of communities. But we kind of got together and talked about it. And so I think it was helpful for a lot of people who felt alone to realize that we were kind of going through something together. And the responses I got back really reaffirmed that the way that I was feeling as somebody who's a leader in this space was trickling down in the way so many other people were feeling too. So I'm glad we named what was going on. I'm glad we named the pain. And I think it allowed NCJW, to be honest, to partner with a lot more organizations that we hadn't been working with previously, because not everybody knew about our Zionism, about our work in Israel, and about our passion, of course, for calling out anti-Semitism wherever it exists, including on the left. And so I'm grateful that we were able to do that. And I watched it back, Chanan. I don't know if you did. I was just trying to imagine, I don't know if you did this too. Like, I can't believe we're still here a year later where there are still hostages. Like, I've got, I don't know if you can see right behind me, I've got a picture of Ofer Calderon, my friend's family member, who's still a hostage. And last year you kind of got a visceral emotional response from me. And to be honest, all these days later, I still have a bit of a visceral emotional response to what happened on the 7th and what's been happening since. So, but I'm grateful to have had this platform and that it resonated so deeply.
Yeah, last time we mentioned this notion of like existential loneliness. That was language that Rabbi Sharon Brous had utilized. The notion of loneliness is something that that permeates through the Jewish consciousness, whether we like it or not. In fact, as I'm thinking about this, when President Obama went to Israel, I forgot what year, 2013. I think the language he used was "Atem lo levad," you are not alone. When President Biden went to Israel in 2022, he gave the equivalent of a Devar Torah about the notion that Am levado yishkon, that basically a nation that stands alone, it will not stand alone as long as the United States is here. And what October 7th brought back for many Jews, regardless of their station, regardless of where they lived, was that loneliness. So being able to talk about this is critically important. The last time we spoke, it was the 27th day of the war. Today, it's the 375th day of the war. And to your point, I think there are still 101 hostages. And suffice it to say, a lot's happened. And so what I want to do right now, I pulled some quotes from our conversation last year. So I did listen to it on 1.5x speed. That's my go-to when it comes to listen to podcasts. And I'm just going to say the quote, and I just ask you to react because I'm curious how you hear it all these days later. All right. Okay. Quote number 1. You said, on that day, rape was used as a tool of war. And then to hear people who claim to be feminists say, were they really raped? Well, this is the resistance. My heart is broken in so many pieces. I have never heard anything like this from a community that has claimed to care about me for a long time. And then you continued, we should not have to convince our friends and allies that murdering Israeli civilians is wrong. Full stop. To be clear, you are not a feminist if you can't feel for the Israeli civilian, women, children, and babies who are murdered. End quote.
I mean, I'm feeling that right now. It's I agree with myself, Hanan. I agree with myself from a year ago. Listen, when people use the language of feminism while brushing aside gender-based violence because of the identity of the victim, they're sending a clear signal that women's rights are negotiable, that rape is sometimes okay, that some women have more dignity than others, and that is more than a hypocrisy. That is a betrayal of all women. And so, to be clear, rape is not resistance. Rape is a crime against humanity. And you've heard me say the voices that we thought were going to speak up the loudest fell into the loudest silence we could have imagined. So that heartbreak, I still hold that heartbreak. We haven't moved fully through that. And I think there are things people can be doing every single day to put those pieces together to help with healing, to get on a better path forward. And we have seen some of that progress. There's more for people to do. But there have been some steps taken from some organizations in the right direction.
Okay, I'm going to get into the conversation about what more for people to do. I'm going to read you 1 or 2 more quotes. you continued that string of thoughts with the following, and you said, quote, "And so I am very angry about what I hear in the secular progressive community and what I'm hearing in the Jewish progressive community, which is a lot of nothing."
Ooh, yeah. Listen, last year around this time, barely anyone had taken out statements, particularly condemning the sexual violence as a tool of war. We did see a flurry of folks take out some statements on the 7th, on the 8th, on the 9th, particularly civil rights organizations, and I don't want to downplay or diminish those. They were coming through. And I'll just give a shout out. National Organization of Women took out a statement on October 7th. And what I could say since is it's been a journey that I wish we didn't have to take, trying to convince people to say out loud that raping Israeli women is bad is not anything I had on my bingo card from my time at NCJW. But it was very important for us to be engaging in conversations one-on-one with certain organizations and people in organizations and people that usually speak out on these issues that hadn't been speaking out. What I can say now is in the course of the last year, most feminist organizations have made statements condemning sexual violence as a tool of war from Hamas. And we could talk about the strategies that worked and some of the strategies that didn't work. Particularly, we held an event at the United Nations. We hosted a special hearing at the United Nations in partnership with Ambassador Gilad Erdan, in which we shared the stories of what took place on the 7th and shared the evidence around sexual violence. It was framed as the special hearing the UN should have put on, the special hearing UN women should have put on, but they didn't, so we did it. But what a lot of people don't know is we invited all the feminist groups to join us. And we told them beforehand, we're not going to call you out from the podium. We're not going to go there to be like, you said nothing. That's not the goal of this. The goal is to share what happened with the world and to make sure these women who were silenced by Hamas have a voice. And most of the organizations that took us up on our offer and came. And within 48 hours, every organization that attended took out a statement condemning the sexual violence. So we did find that there were some ways to invite people in to hear what actually occurred. But you're right. We heard a whole lot of silence, and I think it's also important to note we heard silence from Jewish, like more left-wing organizations after October 7th too, and those things intersect with each other. Who are the people that the justice organizations are following, and who are they taking their lead from?
I think I asked you this last year. A lot of those who operate in the Jewish progressive milieu do so in a domestic context, and so I presume there's some reticence to comment on something that happened officially beyond the shores and the confines of the United States. And that was frustrating for you as it was for me. I mean, if ever there was a time to issue a statement, wouldn't it be now when, some 1,200 Jewish lives in Israel were taken, the worst pogrom we've seen in our collective lifetimes. Did you ever had that land for those in the Jewish progressive community after we spoke? Did you ever talk to people? Did anyone come to you and say, you shouldn't have said that, or you were right, or what did that look like?
Yeah, it's been a journey this past year, and this has been really hard. To feel like the communities that you typically feel aligned with, that you might not be aligned with, has been hard. I think for progressive Zionists, it's been a really hard year. And in the Jewish social justice space, for sure. And, one of the things, this conversation has come up a lot, understanding that what happened sure did happen in Israel, but it was also the largest mass murder of Jews since the Holocaust. And if we can't say that that's bad, we can't ourselves as Jews put a statement out. Who are we? How could we even say we stand for social justice? And so I'll just say, there have been a lot of tears with me and a bunch of other Jewish organizations, Jewish CEOs of other organizations, and the feminist group. But when you actually zoom in on the Jewish left, I think what was really interesting and hard in this journey is a lot of people have gotten to the point where they realize this is a moment where we should be speaking up. We should be engaging on Israel. That has been my hope for a long time. There's really only three organizations that are progressive and Zionist on the left that do multi-issue work. It's the National Council of Jewish Women, it's the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, and it's the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. Most everyone else has not engaged in Israel at all. And what's interesting is there's been conversations because of Abby at the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable to encourage people to explore whether or not they're going to engage on Israel. That was happening before October 7th. I think what became hard, if I'm really honest, is there came a point recently where a lot of organizations decided to now engage on Israel. But it wasn't October 7th that was the tipping point. It was the war to follow. And I have so much empathy for Palestinian civilians, and I have empathy for this moment in time that they still find themselves in, that we are all still in. But it was hard for me to feel like it wasn't enough, like 1,200 Jews being massacred and raped and murdered, that wasn't a tipping point moment. For organizations to say, now we're going to do it. It was after Palestinians had been killed. And so I would welcome everybody in. We need more progressive Zionists. That has to be normal. It shouldn't be abnormal, and it shouldn't be that we're one of a few voices. But we are seeing people enter the space now.
Sorry, Sheila, what do you attribute that initial reticence to in the days after October 7th? Is it discomfort with the potential perception of allies in non-Jewish spaces? How would you interpret that?
Yeah, because most Jewish social justice organizations said nothing, right? Let's be honest, as we're critiquing other organizations too. From my conversations, it's similar to what you just said. It was this idea that happened over there and we're a domestic organization, right? Mm-hmm. Which on the one hand, here we are saying to a lot of abortion funds right now, like, it's not your mission to be focusing on this thing. You don't have to make a statement each time. But there was something in this moment that I think the Jewish people needed to know that we were cared about. And I think what happened in Israel on October 7th transcended those lines as a result of it being an attack on Jews, right? When I saw that 45-minute video that they were showing us from the Hamas footage, right? When somebody called their mom, they said, I killed 10 Jews. It wasn't, I killed 10 Israelis. It wasn't, I killed, and she said good or something along those lines, and not, I can't believe you. That's awful, right? This was an attack on the Jewish people, and what we needed from Jewish organizations and everyone who claims to be our allies was for them to speak up and to say that they are sad with us. It was such, Chanan, the reason it hurt so much, and it still does when I think about it, is because it was such low-hanging fruit, right? When there is a spectrum of anti-Semitism, you've got the kind of blurry, lighter stuff on this side, and you've got like Tree of Life on the other side. After Tree of Life, everybody spoke up because we know that kind of violence is so horrific and bad. We know how to call it out. And we typically find, right, even in other examples from sexual harassment to assault, people can easier call out this side than this side. And here we have something that's off the charts. It's as bad could be. And people felt uncomfortable calling it out because it happened in Israel. That's what we have to fix, and that's what we have to address.
Are you sensing that? I mean, listen, the central goal of some of these organizations, you tell me, has been to make Zionism as simply unacceptable opinion. You can't support the existence of the state. And last time we spoke, the Israeli military had just launched, I think it was like a week prior, a large-scale ground operation, and listen, to date, it's difficult, if not impossible, to verify the number of Palestinians, Palestinian casualties, because I think a lot of the numbers are derived from, Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry authorities, and they don't necessarily differentiate between combatants and civilians. But suffice to say, the death toll is high. The humanitarian situation is quite dire. And to your point, a lot of the Jewish social justice organizations, your progressive organizations, that's when they started issuing statements. So how has that impacted your work in the last 11 months, if at all?
Yeah, listen, NCJW and myself personally, I have empathy for Palestinian civilians. I think war is hard and bad for the most part. Um, it pains me, and I think we do need to talk about what's happening. I think we need to talk about policies and action. I think it just taught me that particularly on the Jewish side of things, a lot of people are more comfortable speaking out when it's another group of people who are experiencing violence. And we have to start getting more comfortable calling it out when it's us, putting our life mask on, saying that it's unacceptable, really, to call out forms of violence towards almost every group of people, but not when it happens to the Jewish people. And so I think a lot of people, what we're seeing, I mean, like we're seeing this right now with people who are not experts on Middle East policy, pretending like they're experts on Middle East policy because A, they went to Israel once, or B, they saw a few TikToks. So if groups want to come into the space, there's a lot of learning that has to happen and a lot of expertise to follow. And I think one of the things that at least I think people have found value in NCJW, you know, right away we were focused on the sexual violence, we were focused on the hostages. We are very clear that the true villain of this story is Hamas, and anybody trying to make it anybody else is incorrect and normalizes Hamas and gives Hamas power. So we always have to call out the perpetrator. If we don't like decisions of the Israeli government, if we don't like strategies and tactics of the Israeli government, which, by the way, personally, I don't like some of them, that's not anti-Zionist. It's not anti-Israel. That actually shows you care about a country when you're saying that you wish the policies would be different and you're fighting for something different. I've met with Prime Minister Netanyahu 3 times since October 7th to say that directly to him. And so I think we have an issue, though, when we warp a bit of how we got into this situation, how serious October 7th was, what it means that there are still hostages, and what it means that if Hamas would release these hostages, that we would be in a very different place right now. And so I have not quite identified fully, and our organization hasn't, with a lot of the statements being made from left-wing social justice organizations and Jewish social justice organizations, because they haven't centered what happens on October 7th. They haven't centered Jewish and Israeli pain. And we think you can hold both, right? So if people look back to a lot of our stuff right after October 7th, it was really all about October 7th. And then there was a point where it expanded and we were talking about Palestinian civilians, of course. We're talking about Palestinian women, of course. And I'm saying, of course, particularly for this audience, because we can't be shy about talking about Palestinians too. And that doesn't mean that we should be building empathy for Hamas. That is not who we should be, and we have to call them out over and over and over and over again. Because I'll say this, and I know this as an organization that focuses on violence against women, and I've said this before publicly, the term violence against women in and of itself is super problematic, right? Because it just assumes it happens. If you're a woman, you have violence happen to you. It gives a pass to the perpetrator. We so expect violence to happen to women that we don't even talk about who's doing it and why, right? And so as we look at what's happening in the Middle East, as we look at what's happening in Gaza, as we look at what took place in Israel by Hamas, we have to over and over and over again name Hamas as a perpetrator, name Hamas as the reason why people were living in particular conditions, as why there aren't bomb shelters, like the complexities that exist today that allow the situation to be this death toll so high. And we have to acknowledge that their goal is to make martyrs of the Palestinian people. And I would so much to venture to say that there are 101 hostages from Israel who were taken from Israel in Gaza, but that every single Palestinian civilian, in a way, is a hostage to Hamas. And so I think it's very important not to lose sight of that. And I hope that as more Jewish organizations and progressive organizations come into this space, that they could do both things at the same time. For sure, criticize away to the government. We do it here, we could do it there. But to understand that this gets super complicated when you're literally trying to negotiate with terrorists.
I feel like, I sense that a lot of those on the left and progressive community are using words like genocide. Is that a legitimate critique of the Israeli government?
I would say no. I don't.
But
I
what do you
would
say
say
to
no.
that? What do you say to like? I agree, but like, what would you say? Have you had those conversations with those in the broader social justice space, or even politicians who are now normalizing that language in this context? Like, has that ever come up? And what do you say?
Yeah, it comes up all the time. Genocide, colonialism, even just the concept of victim and oppressor. And I think one of the things, there's a few things happening, and then I'll tell you what I say. The few things happening. Anti-Semitism is in the spaces that I'm in, that you're in. It's everywhere, right?
Mhm.
And some of the oldest tropes of anti-Semitism is Jews and power and Jews and whiteness.
Mm.
And when people believe those tropes, they believe Israel as the oppressor, Palestinians as the victim, and there's not the ability to see what happened as October 7th as as Israelis being a victim. And so there is anti-Semitism underneath why I think we get to this situation to begin with. I would say genocide is when a group of people would like to fully erase another group of people because of who they are. And the example of that happening right now in Israel and Gaza is Hamas. That is their mandate, to kill all
Right.
the Jews. And so that is not what's happening in Israel. And by the way, there are people I know, Hanan, and it doesn't bother me in the same way, who are just anti-war. They're anti-war everywhere all the time. Cool, like good. We need more people. We need more people who care about peace more than war in this world. We need more leaders who care about peace more than war in this world. There's some consistency there, and it works, right? But there are also people who are sitting here saying we stand with Ukraine, talking about a war that's ongoing in which more Russian civilians have been killed than Ukrainians, and that happens sometimes in war, who are comfortable with money going to help, Ukraine, and then not displaying the same perspective when it comes to Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. Even if we don't like some of the decisions happening with the prime minister, Israel's being attacked on so many different sides with so many missiles coming in. And it has all year. I was just saying, my friend Abby, whose relative is held hostage, just yesterday I was looking, they brought a couch from their apartment into the bomb shelter because they're there so frequently. It was starting to get uncomfortable. And so I think we need to be expansive in our mindset about what's taking place, and we can hold that it is hard for Israelis and Palestinians right now. And we could hold that there's decisions the government is making from Israel, and we could hold that the terrorist group Hamas has never been making decisions in the best interest of their people. What I would say is, I still think, and I might disagree with some people listening in here, it's NCGW's position that the hostages should be the highest priority. And there is no such thing as absolute victory in Israel if they all come back in body bags. Like that's part of what it means to push. And sometimes I disagree with the prime minister in prioritizing the full evisceration of Hamas. I might want Hamas to go away, and I do not think they should be in power, and I do not think
Mhm.
there's a future safety for Israel with Hamas there. But I think the prioritization of the hostages for our organization is the most important. And all that said, I
Yeah.
would say, Hanan, when I'm sitting across somebody who's using language that I find to be both uneducated or offensive or anti-Semitic, the first thing I ask them, I don't say, this is what I know, this is my position. I say, tell me what you mean by that. Right. And
Hmm.
I'd say the term the most that I've seen movement on is is around Zionism. So I was with a civil rights leader and I said, they said, isn't Zionism racism? Right? And I said, well, tell me what you mean by Zionism. They said
Hmm.
something along the effect of, well, Zionism is the oppression of the Palestinian people and the occupation, and they kept going. And I was like,
Hmm.
well, yeah, that sounds like racism, but that's not
Hmm.
what Zionism is. That's not what Zionism is to me. Let me tell you what it is to me, right? It's about the
Yeah.
self-determination of the Jewish people. And that's not in conflict with the self-determination of the Palestinian people. So at the end of the day, I think we need more people on the left to be willing to engage in conversations, willing to sit across from people and say, what do you mean by that? Can I share, like, with kindness? I think because that relationships take us further. I don't want to make
Yeah.
excuses for it, but we need to move people along. And yelling at people at social media it doesn't usually work to move people along. So there's a long way to go. And there's disagreement in the Jewish community too. And Hanan, I think we don't talk about this enough. One of the things that I learned from like the feminist groups and others that put out statements, particularly those who put out statements that have been problematic along the way, is
Hmm.
that almost every single one of them checked with somebody who was Jewish first,
Mm.
right? A lot of them checked with people who were involved with Jewish Voice for Peace. Some of them just checked with their like employee who was in their 20s working in comms. Most every organization thought to themselves, let me first check with somebody Jewish before I put this out. But not all
Hmm.
Jews have the language, and not all Jews in these organizations are Zionist. And that creates a complexity that
Yeah.
I think we need to address by owning our Zionism in these spaces.
Okay, I have a dozen questions I want to ask you, but I also see a lot of good ones that are coming through. So I'm going to start with Bob Sandler, who says, "Thank you for doing this webinar. Can you elaborate?" This might be a tough one, Sheila, but can you elaborate on the differences you've seen in response to October 7th from the respective American Orthodox, conservative, and Reform leaders? Good luck with that. Um,
I mean, that's a good question.
it's a
Here's
great
what I can
question.
say. I'll share what I've seen together because I've never been a part of a moment like this, like the October 8th world we live in. The
Hmm.
Orthodox Union and the Reform movement and the conservative movement and me and ADL and AJC and JFNA and JCPA, there was a group of us that got together and had all our meetings with government together.
Hmm.
And there was so much more we agreed on than disagreed. And I'll just give a shout out right now to my dear friend, Rabbi Moshe Hauer at the Orthodox Union, who is my teacher, my rabbi, and my friend. Our tradition says something about that. And sometimes you just don't know what the experience is like for somebody who's not you, right? Like I come to the table talking about the intersection of anti-Semitism and gender, right? The way Jewish women are getting threats right now looks different than the way men are being threatened with anti-Semitism, and we have to talk
Hmm.
about it.
Hmm.
When Rabbi Hauer is in the room, he gets to talk about what it is like for a community right now to be wearing a kippah and to be visibly seen as Jewish all the time in the spaces that they're in and what that's like.
Hmm.
And I respect him so much. And sometimes we disagree a little on how we should call in versus out Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu. But what I could say at the end of the day, across the spectrum of Jewish denominations, I have been proud that we have come together in a unified voice when we're advocating in government in the United States, pushing the United States to do more, when we are meeting with the prime minister in Israel and other people there, that we have come together, that we don't contradict each other, and we found our lane because at the end of the day, we care about Jewish safety. We care about Israel existing as a Jewish and democratic state in a way that's safe and secure for the future. And we care about Palestinians in Gaza. And I think that we have so much more
That's the case across
in common
denominations?
right now.
Is that the
Huh?
case? That's the case across denominations.
That's how I've been feeling. I think there's a little bit more wiggle room of who's calling out whom and when and what's public
Yeah.
and private as you move from the reform movement to the Orthodox movement. But I think at the end of the day, the messages are the same.
So in other words, you often come with a unified voice, not necessarily a uniform voice, and that's important.
The how is different than the what,
Than the what.
but that we're united in these times.
Okay, this question comes from Anonymous. It's a really insightful one. It says, what are some of the quote guardrails that NCJW has had to put in place in order to be really clear about who they will and will not work with when it comes to statements and actions that are anti-Israel and anti-Semitic?
Yeah, easy question there, huh?
Oh, as you're thinking through the answer, can I just say one thing that you
Okay.
said last year?
Yeah.
Because I do recall, some variation of you saying, where I think NCJW is sitting right now is we do want to have a firm line, and we don't usually have these lines. And there is a line if you can't see that raping Jews is bad. That's it. We're not working with you, the end. And I think that's okay for us to say. And I think it has to be okay for us to say. And then later on, you said, I do think there are people that we do say goodbye to with pain. And that's the right thing. If people can't see our humanity, we can't be working arm in arm. So I guess as a corollary, have you had to say goodbye to anybody? And to the original question, are there certain guardrails that you put in informally or formally?
Yeah. Ooh. Yes, yes, and yes. So first, let me say this. Statements don't change the world, but they can and they do start conversations. And that's why when people who usually speak up go quiet, it's noticeable. And we need to pay attention to that. And so the two truths at the same time is that there are organizations that made statements that we kind of wish didn't. Right? We don't think it's everybody's lane to make statements on the Middle East, and that's okay. There are organizations that didn't make statements that we thought they should because it did fit in the realm of their organization. And regardless of Middle East policy, what we really wanted to see is that people cared about Jewish suffering. And when Jewish people came to different groups and said, ouch, we're feeling alone, we wanted to hear back, we see you, we hear you. And there were so many ways to do it throughout the year, right? Even if people missed it on October 7th, we shared, you could post Happy Hanukkah, you could post around the holidays, you could post around Jewish American Heritage Month, you can put like, show us that we belong here.
Hmm.
And so what I can say is we have been an organization traditionally with no red lines. It's how we've always operated. And just keep in mind, at 131 years old, when we started, women weren't allowed to be in organizations run by men, and Jewish women, weren't allowed to be in women's groups. So, in order to make change, we had to sit at tables with people who were anti Semitic and people who were misogynistic. And even now, in our voting rights work, we work with like Christian groups that are anti abortion, but we agree on voting. So we have always had this no lines policy, which is why you see NCJW show up in a lot of spaces that are unexpected, because we say we're going to show up, but we're going to be 100% who we are and not make any excuses. That said, what's interesting about the question is we almost didn't have to say goodbye to some of the groups that crossed into that space because they said goodbye to us.
Mm. Did you get a
And
lot of that?
we did not get a lot of it. There, in particular, there was a reproductive rights group that we were building a strong relationship with, not like a historic relationship that focuses on the Muslim community, that just is convinced that Israel is the sexual violence from October 7th.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, that's not a starting point for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we're
Okay.
currently not engaging in the moment with the organization. But what I can say is this, Chanan, because we have to hold both, right? Like, let's be firm. That's a line. It's a
Mm-hmm.
problem. And two, at most of these organizations, these are decisions made by one or two people. And there's usually leadership change at different points. And so it doesn't mean we can never work with this organization ever again. It doesn't mean
Um,
we would work with them without talking about harm and whatever else and repair. But as of right now, what I could say is there are very few organizations I would say are over the deep end. The majority of the organizations sit kind of in this yellow. And then there are very few that are fully green. It's this yellow place that I think we need to show up even more.
Okay. I know have a hard stop at 12:45. Can you go to 12:50? Right answers only.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. So Harriet Schleifer asked the following: how do you encourage slash engage students to open their minds and learn about the modern history of Israel, the Middle East on the college campus? So many of the protesters are uninformed, disinformed, and possibly have misdirected passion. Universities can offer seminars, but how to get to the uneducated to enter the room? And you have a history before you took the helm at NCJW at doing precisely elements of this at Hillel International, the youngest ever VP, if I'm not mistaken. So what are your thoughts on that question from Harriet?
First of all, hi, Harriet, Chair of Conference of Presidents, who's been amazing at bringing Jewish organizations together in this post-October 7th world of ours. We're still October 7th every day, as it feels. Yeah, campus is a passion of mine. I worked on campus for 13 years at Hillel, and I first want to give a shout out to any Hillel professionals on the call. What a difficult year it has been. I think we need to demand more from our universities who love to make it seem like this is complicated when it's not. It is not complicated to call out anti-Semitism. It is not complicated to create safe spaces for Jews. Campus has been working with diverse students with diverse needs for a very long time, and they know what to do. So that's first. But second, I'll give you like the pitch I used to give when I worked at Hillel. When I worked at Hillel and I'd sit and talk about Israel and particularly younger people and their relationship with Israel, which looks different generationally and is important to acknowledge, right? This is a generation that has to love Israel usually with their brain first and their heart second. And an older generation, because of how we were raised in world events, often love Israel with their heart first and can move to their brain second. It's a different journey to start not with your heart. And there are some students, of course, who do. But what I like to say is this: when I worked at Hillel and a student came to me and they said, "Hey, Sheila, I'm not sure I believe in God," I'll tell you what I didn't do. I did not hand them a fact card of 5 reasons they should be pro-God. And I didn't ask them to join a pro-God club. I didn't ask them to wear a sweatshirt that said they were pro-God. I asked them what was happening that was leading them to feel this way. And we would explore it together. A younger generation right now doesn't particularly like a binary narrative on most things. And the term pro-Israel is sometimes too far from where a younger generation can start from. And so instead of forcing a term or a phrase or saying you have to be all in, the question becomes, what about Israel do you want to explore? What are the things that you're interested in? What's causing you pain, or what are you not excited about? And let's look at it. Students are smart. They have the ability to understand a lot of these things if they are exposed to the kind of terminology and exploration or that they are about almost every other thing. And the best example I can give that I used to give at Hillel is actually around the brand Starbucks, which I know has come up in the news for a variety of reasons lately. But just in many reasons, this is a brand that most young people shouldn't like. It's big, it's expensive, it's, cookie cutter. There's a lot of things that would tell you Generation Z shouldn't like this brand. But the company made strategic decisions a while back to be more inclusive of a younger generation, right? A younger person doesn't go into Starbucks and order a black coffee. They don't. I've been on like 1,000 coffee dates with students. No one's ever ordered a black coffee. That's like the pro-Israel or lots of older people order black coffee. They go in and they order something custom, and sometimes they order off a secret menu. And Starbucks, what did they do? They added their name, which was so people would take pictures and you see that they're at Starbucks. They added more milk varieties. They created a custom drink. And I think what we have to understand is if we want to be in the same store and we want to have the people who are like gung-ho pro-Israel, wearing it on your t-shirt, etc., ordering the black coffee. If we want younger people to be there too, we have to allow them to experiment a little with what their own custom relationship is with Israel, what that looks like. And universities should be educational institutions to talk about it, to explore. Put two people on stage, not to debate. Put them on stage, set it up like a living room, and have them have a conversation and model it. And if you're really good, have them swap opinions and show that it's possible to really have empathy for different kinds of beliefs in this moment. We're in such a partisan time in this country, Chanan. We all know it. And we love to vilify the other. We do it a lot too. In the Jewish community, anybody who doesn't get this, X, right? But we also have an opportunity, particularly on our college campuses and K through 12, to teach people. And I think what Hillel and Jewish camps and some of the movements have done so well is bring Israelis into everyday life. You know, Israelis working at camp, the shlichim in different communities. And so we need to humanize people more, and we need to learn and lean into that more. And we need to understand the way young people are going to engage with Israel may look different than the way we are engaging it, but there's still a path forward.
Okay. There's so many good questions, and I'm just going to take one or two off, and you feel free to address any of them, and then we're going to wrap. Sam Sadel asks, how do you react to public intellectuals like Ta-Nehisi Coates and others who challenge the underlying narrative of the legitimacy of a Jewish state and or Jewish particularism? Hold that. And then Nancy Kaufman, your predecessor, asks, so wonderful to hear this important discussion. Sheila, what, if any, have been strategies that have worked within the Jewish community on your, quote, left flank and not JVP? Final two questions. Your thoughts?
Okay. I have not read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, so I've only seen what the interviews are. And what I could say is I take issue with a few things. One is somebody who may be trying to be perceived as an expert on something that they're not. But more than that, and I'll have to read the full book to get a sense of that, I take issue with trying to make empathy for Hamas. As I said before, it's irresponsible to try to build empathy for Hamas. And not only is it irresponsible, it's insulting to Palestinian civilians, because Hamas and Palestinian civilians are not the same. And I said this before, empathy can go to Palestinian civilians. Our empathy can go to hostages. Our empathy can go to people who are at the music festival. Our empathy can go to Israelis killed at their kibbutzim in their homes and those who were displaced. Our empathy can go to all civilians. Our hearts are big enough for that. But it is dangerous to verbalize empathy for Hamas and to imagine what you might do in certain situations. And that's what I have found to be problematic. Anybody who would call for the erasure of the state of Israel is proposing genocide. And we got to call that out every time that happens. I don't know if that's what he said. I've only heard the interview around Hamas. And I'll say this, Ta-Nehisi Coates is somebody I've learned a lot from over the years and somebody I've deeply respected. And I could still hold that there might be treasures in this book for us to learn from, and some things that feel problematic. We got to hold those together. And Nancy Kaufman, my favorite, listen, if we look for the problems, we're going to find them on the left, on the right, everywhere in between. What I value about me having been invited to be here is so often it's people from the other sides criticizing the other. And I think it's the left's responsibility to call out anti-Semitism on the left. And it's the right's responsibility to call out anti-Semitism on the right. And it's all of our responsibility to say anti-Semitism is bad, no matter where it comes from. I think if I were to make an ask from people here, and some of the things that's missing in this moment that would help the left in particular, is that we've seen since October 7th investments, at least in the United States, in influencers and social media, which helps a lot of us to not feel gaslit. But we also need an investment in relational work to counter anti-Semitism. This is the work that takes time. It takes deep conversations. The return is high, but it takes patience and persistence. It is a long-term play, and that is what the extremists who are on the left have done. We need more Jewish Zionist organizations to have the capacity to be engaging in these conversations. We've seen an investment in organizations whose sole focus is Israel, but we need an investment in organizations that are Zionist and work on other issues. And we need an investment of groups on the front lines of combating anti-Semitism who are on the left. You know, that's not to invest in people infiltrating the left. We're on to you. Some funders on this call, we're on to you. We see When people invest in groups over here to try to come into this space, it never works. And I have to say, because we know this, and I know there's funders on this call, and with love, because we've come together to really show up for Israel right now, which is what matters most. But what many Jewish communal organizations have been doing has not worked to move the needle. What we have built is a lovely echo chamber for ourselves. And if we want to move the needle, we need the people who are on the front lines to be well resourced. We need to hold more space for the nuance and the exploration going in. We need to be comfortable with people criticizing the Israeli government at times. And we need to hold that Jewish safety is intertwined, that we care deeply about the future safety of Israel, and that we're going to be better when our tent, the tent we love to talk about as wide as inclusive, comes just a little further on the left to capture people in who really want to be here, who are Zionists, who care about the future of Israel, who care about Jewish safety. And I hope we can create a more welcoming environment for them.
Wise words from Sheila Katz. Thank you, as ever, for your moral clarity and your inspiring leadership now and a year prior. And thank you for taking time today to share with us your thoughts a year after October 7th. I want to just encourage everyone to join us next Tuesday at the same time at 12 o'clock for a conversation with Ambassador Michael Oren about his essay, The Day After. And please do continue to read some of the essays that we've had most recently on the faith issue, and we hope to have essays for a forthcoming issue in a few weeks' time. So be on the lookout for that, sapirjournal.org. Sheila, thank you so very much, and thank you all for joining us today. Take care, everyone.